Legal Environment of Business, Chapter 27, dealing with antitrust law. This is not an area that most of you will have much to do with in your future. Hopefully some of you are extremely successful, perhaps the head of a large corporation, and may have some concerns that relate to antitrust law. But otherwise, it probably will not, and therefore we're just going to kind of touch the basics of antitrust law. Okay, so the Sherman Antitrust Act was one of the first laws dealing with antitrust. So a trust basically is like a monopoly in that it somehow has an effect on a capitalistic economy when certain things are done to monopolize a market, so to speak. And so the laws that regulate economic competition are referred to generally as antitrust laws. In 1887, antitrust legislation began in Congress, passed the Interstate Commerce Act in 1887, and then followed with the Sherman Antitrust Act in 1890. In 1914, Congress passed the Clayton Act and the Federal Trade Commission Act. Okay, so the Sherman Act. The Sherman Act says that every contract, combination in the form of trust or otherwise, or conspiracy in the restraint of trade or commerce among the several states or with foreign nations is declared illegal, punishable by a fine or imprisonment or both. Okay, so the major provisions, again, every person who monopolizes or attempts to monopolize or combine or conspire with any other person or persons to monopolize any part of the trade or commerce among the several states or with foreign nations shall be deemed guilty of a felony. Sounds pretty simple, but in fact it's extremely complicated, and we don't get into some of that in the lecture. The book gets into some of it in a little bit more detail. And if you look at other books that get into it in more detail, you look at things like whether it's a lateral acquisition or a vertical acquisition, all those kind of things that the courts and subsequent laws have looked at to determine whether or not the government should step in and try and prevent an antitrust activity. Section 2 deals with predatory pricing, which occurs when one firm, the so-called predator, attempts to drive its competitors from the market by selling its product at prices substantially below the normal costs of production. Okay, the idea here is, and what happened is people would sell something below what they even paid for it in order to attract all the customers to their business. Willing to take a loss for a substantial period of time to put the other competitor out of business. Once the other competitor was out of business, they raise their prices as high as they like and still be able to sell the goods, make up the difference of what they had previously lost, and now have a monopoly. So once the competitors are eliminated, the predator presumably raises the prices to recapture its losses and earn its higher profits. Okay, so the U.S. Supreme Court has defined monopolies or monopolization as involving first the possession of monopoly power in the relevant market, and second the willful acquisition or maintenance of the power as distinguished from just growing or the development as a consequence of a superior product, business acumen, or historic accident. Okay. Section 2 prohibits attempted monopolization of a market and requires proof of an anti-competitive conduct, the specific intent to exclude competitors and garner monopoly power, and a dangerous probability of success in achieving monopoly power. So that ends part 1 of Chapter 27.